everybody. Welcome to tonight's author chat with Jo Furniss. I'm going to pass over to you now, Jo, to introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. Hi, Caroline. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to be here in this group, which I joined, well, a few months ago, but I'm sort of quite active in this group. I find some of these groups are quite difficult to actually sort of get involved in the conversation. And this one I found really quite nice. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me on. My name is Jo Furniss. I'm the author of 2 already published novels, which are these 2. And one more which is going to come out in August, which is perfect timing actually, because they arrived last night. I didn't expect to have copies, and then I got a knock on the door and handed a box, and here they are, which is always exciting. So that's the new one that's coming out in August. But I kind of got in touch with you guys because of the anthology, which is this one, Afraid of the Light, which came out a couple of weeks ago, which is the anthology of short stories, crime and suspense stories. And David very kindly gave it a little shout out. Yeah, and so that's who I am.
And do you want to tell us a little bit more about the anthology? The money goes to charity, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So it kind of started at the beginning of the year. Well, just at the end of last year, because a bunch of us went for a Christmas lunch, and during that lunch we got into a bit of a chat, and we said, it'd be quite fun to all write a short story and put them together into an anthology. And we went away, we kind of went home quite enthused by the idea, but with no particular deadline to do it. And then, of course, this kind of COVID situation sort of, in January just sort of, quite rapidly descended, as we know. And we realised that because a lot of us had already written our stories, most of us, I think, had actually gone away and written the stories, that we had quite a good opportunity to kind of push this thing out quite quickly, and give the money to a charity that were going to be involved in some way with this COVID situation. We'd always said that we would give the money to charity, and we'd always said that we would give the money to a mental health charity. We can talk a bit more about that later if you like, but I think a lot of us feel that there are some sort of parallel, that mental health and psychology are such an important part of what we do as writers, and that we felt quite sort of, keen to support that. And we just immediately thought of the Samaritans, because, they are there to help people in a crisis, and we are in the middle of a crisis, and it seems fairly logical to assume that, they're going to come under increasing pressure as people struggle in this situation. So we set it up so that the book goes out on Amazon. It is $1.99 for the ebook, and I think $3.99 for this, and all of our profits go to the Samaritans.
That's lovely. I've got some questions that came in before we started tonight, actually, that relate to the anthology.
Yes.
So I'll ask you those now.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask, what were the challenges in putting them one together? Like, what's the biggest challenges in getting an anthology together?
Well, I suppose herding cats is the obvious answer to that. You've got 14 writers who've all got different deadlines and different commitments and different ways of working. And some of us, I'm probably like the class SWAT. So I kind of went away and I wrote my story I think I was the second person to submit the story. So there was one person, I think Simon Masters was even swattier than me. So I'm kind of like a SWAT. And then there's other people who wrote the story like the night before, and all of that. So I think that was quite a challenge. And that was really a challenge for Victoria Selman, because she's the one that sort of took the lead in pulling it all together. And then I suppose the other challenge was, once we did decide that we were going to get this thing out in time to sort of, to give the money to a charity while this COVID situation was going, was just the speed with which we kind of turned it around. And we're all traditionally published writers, so none of us had a lot of experience of self-publishing. And so we all sort of put on different hats, depending on, our various skills. So, for example, Elle Croft, who works as a travel writer, she sort of went off and she came up with this brilliant marketing plan. Victoria, like I say, she was kind of cracking the whip and pulling the whole thing together. Phoebe Morgan, who also works for a publisher, so she had a a huge amount of really useful knowledge in terms of, the technical stuff that we had to do when we were getting the collection out on Amazon, like how we actually, do the data, the keywords, all that kind of stuff behind the scenes. I did the cover, which, basically a piece of software did it for me. I don't want to overstate involvement, but so everyone kind of did their own thing. Adam Southwood and Heather Critchlow, they actually pulled the thing and turned it into a physical book and put the thing, so everyone was there kind of doing their stuff behind the scenes. It was actually a really exciting few weeks, and I think we sort of got this collective sense of energy that we were all sort of feeding off each other. And every day we've got this little WhatsApp group, and someone would pop up and say, I've got this interview, or I've got this thing, or, Pigeonhole have agreed to put the book out for free. And we were like, yay. And so it kind of turned into this kind of huge, collective effort. So it was a challenge to get it out, and it wasn't quite a steep learning curve, but it was actually brilliant. It was really, it was really good. It was great working with all these people, and I feel like we've got to know each other as a group really quite well because of it.
That's great. And one of our admins, Jason Kelly,
yes,
hi Jason, he said, how did you go about choosing the authors for the anthology, and were you told to stick to a certain word count?
Yeah, we were. So we had a 3,000 word count, which was quite challenging for me because I'm quite wordy. I tend to go on a bit. My sort of method of writing is to write like 3 sentences, and then in the edit I have to go back and delete 2 of them. That's my sort of my approach. So writing to quite a short word count was quite a challenge for me. How we chose the authors, well, we sort of didn't, like I say, we all went for this lunch together. That lunch, so basically what happened was that we had a WhatsApp group to organise that lunch, and after the lunch we all sort of stayed in the WhatsApp group just sort of chit-chatting, and there's about 20 people in the WhatsApp group, and of those about 14 decided to contribute to the anthology, and the others who didn't were mainly because they had some other commitment, they were bang up against a deadline or something like that, you know what I mean, something like that. So it ended up just with 14 out of the 18 or 20 or whatever it is on this WhatsApp group decided to contribute to the anthology, and we're planning another one which we're hoping to get out in time for Christmas, and I think it will be this 14 again, and hopefully, I can't really say too much, but 1 or 2 sort of big names, but that's an iron in the fire, so I don't want to go off too soon with it, but yeah, that's the aim. So the idea is to try and have Afraid of the Light Christmas version, which we're tentatively calling Afraid of the Fairy Lights.
Oh, I like that.
We did there. No, we're not really, but it's just
while we're on the anthology as well, Victoria Salmon, who we now know was instrumental in it,
is the brains behind it all.
But it's an Amazon bestseller and sold nearly 1,000 copies in its first week, with all proceeds going to the Samaritans. How does that make you feel?
I'm really proud of it, actually. I mean, I'm really proud to be, part of. I mean, it's an amazing group that, that it's a wonderful group of writers. I think it's quite important for me personally as well, because I was living abroad for a long time, and I moved back to this country 2 years ago, and I didn't really have any kind of network at all. And I sort of went along to a few of the kind of crime writers festivals and conferences, and I met this bunch of writers. They're people that I've met. Victoria, I think, was one of the first people I met at Crime Fest, which we should be there right now, right? Crime Fest at Bristol should have been this weekend, only it was cancelled. And I think she was the first person I met there, and we sat down and got chatting, and then discovered that we have the same publisher, which was like, small world. And I've sort of developed this sort of, friendship and working friendship with this great bunch of people. So it's it's brilliant, and it's actually been quite nice to have something to do, something sort of going on that feels productive during this really difficult time. So I think that's been quite important to me as well. So yeah, it's brilliant, and it's just nice. It's nice to have my name on the front cover alongside all these amazing people.
We've got some questions about your traveling, actually.
Oh yeah.
Valerie Keogh, who's a writer in the group, she says, "Do you still do a lot of traveling?"
Well, obviously not at the moment. I yes and no. No, I'm nowhere near as much as I did. So I basically I lived for a couple of years in Cameroon, which is West Africa, and I was working there as a journalist. So I travelled quite a lot when I was there, sort of for work, really. Um, so that was amazing. So I was based in Cameroon, and I went to sort of like Chad and Sao Tome and Ethiopia, and all these kind of quite funky places. Did some really interesting things there, and then I lived in Singapore for quite a long time, and that's a really easy place to travel from because it's right in the center of Asia. So you get on a plane for sort of an hour, and you can be in Vietnam or Bali or Philippines. Like these really amazing places, but they're right on your doorstep. And I traveled a huge amount. Um, Obviously not so much now, but I'm very fortunate. My parents live in Spain, so I tend to go down there once a year. I've got an excuse because I've got to go and visit. So yeah, I mean, it's not like it was, when I could fly through Singapore airport all the time, which is amazing. But yeah, I do when I can.
And Jason said, "How did you end up in Singapore? And
Okay.
what other countries would you like to live in or visit?"
Yes. Well, the short story really is that it's because my husband's job has taken us to all these places. He works in the coffee industry. So we've kind of moved around a bit with his job. I actually moved to Singapore twice. We went there once, spent a couple of years, got sent somewhere else, and then ended up going back again. So I've been posted twice to Singapore. I was there just over 7 years altogether. So it's one of the one of the longest running places that I've lived. Felt very sort of connected, really, in some ways, to Singapore. But like I was saying earlier about the network, you do feel a long way away from things, and it's quite nice to be back and really plugged into to the crime writing community here that's so thriving. Yeah, anyway, so Singapore, so that's what took us there, and spent some time in Switzerland in between time. In terms of, what was his other question? Where else I would live?
Yeah, or like to travel to?
Oh, I like to travel anywhere. I'm a bit chalk and cheese with the traveling because on the one hand, obviously, I like to just kind of like go and have a lovely holiday somewhere. But then on the other hand, I quite like going to places that are quite rubbish and not even like necessarily having a great time, just sort of to see, I don't know, to kind of see somewhere that's sort of completely different and just really interesting. I suppose one place that I really haven't traveled very much is South America. And being, like I said before, my husband's in the coffee industry, so that's such a sort of a coffee culture, that sort of Latin America and Brazil and all of those countries. It almost feels like a kind of a gap in my experience. So I'd probably go for that if I had to relocate somewhere. I would also move to Australia on the drop of a hat, but that's kind of a bit predictable because everyone would think would move to Australia if they could.
No, I'm scared of spiders. I'd go nowhere near.
Yeah, I have to say that is our experience. When we were in Singapore, we went to Australia a couple of times because it's not so very far away. And I have to say the wildlife is quite in your face in Australia. Like the first time we went to the beach, there was a lady standing there putting a sign on the beach saying sharks. And the first time we went into the sort of anywhere slightly out of the city, and the first night there was a massive huntsman spider on the children's bedroom wall. So you do, yeah. It's right there. The wildlife. It's kind of coming for you.
We've got a question on the stream that says, "How many languages can you speak?"
I speak several languages very badly. I've lived in Cameroon. That's a French-speaking country, so I learned French while I was there. I actually I did A-level French, so that was a bit of a help, although I'd sort of merrily forgotten it. So I sort of picked up French while I was there, and then in Switzerland, I was in the German-speaking part. Didn't speak a word of German before I went, so I spent we were there for 6 years. So I picked up a fair bit, but never enough to read a book in those languages. That kind of bugged me. And that's actually going back to Jason's question about where you would live. That's almost become one of my criteria now, is that I don't think I've got the energy now to move to another country where I'd have to learn another language, because it just takes up so much of your time and your energy. And you sort of go through that period where I always felt like I'd had quite a lot of my personality removed when I was having to sort of function in another language. I couldn't write in another language, and I don't think I've got the capacity to kind of get to that level. It's like I have this natural block at a certain level. So yeah, so French and German are okay, but a bit rubbish.
And we've got, do you have a favourite type of coffee?
Oh yeah, I do. Quite opinionated about coffee. I'm quite a coffee snob, actually. It's very naughty. My husband, who is obviously the coffee guy, even he laughs at how much of a coffee snob I am. So I would go for an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, or maybe a Sumatran, or maybe a Kenyan. They're all quite similar. So Kenyan, Ethiopian, and Sumatran coffee are a similar sort of type. They're quite what they call acidic. They're quite sort of light and flavoursome.
Nice.
Yeah.
We've got a question as well that says, would you ever set a book in a country which you've previously lived in? I think you have done that, haven't you?
I have. Well, yeah. Hi, Samantha, by the way. Thank you for your questions. You don't like heat or spiders. Yeah. You definitely wouldn't like Singapore then, I think, because that is super hot. Yeah, I set a book in Singapore, although at the point where I wrote the book, and in fact the point where I'd sort of almost finished the book, I didn't realize that I was going to be leaving. We sort of left quite rapidly because of changes to my husband's job. So I had no idea when I wrote the book that it was going to be a kind of, swan song to Singapore, really. And in fact, the book, all the way, hang on, I'm just trying to find it. Got it here. It's this one with this parrot. I love my parrot. I still think this is my favourite cover. The story revolves around, it's about an expat woman living in Singapore who gets suspicious about what her husband is doing when he goes on his business travels from Singapore, sort of all around the world. And when she starts looking into it, she discovers that she assumes that maybe he's playing away from home. And then once she sort of cyber stalks him a bit, she discovers that actually he could be up to something much, much worse. And she ends up sort of chasing him around the world, sort of trying to find out what he's actually up to. And this book came about actually because I was part of a brilliant writers group in Singapore Writers Group. And one of the guys who went along to the group, also his day job was that he worked for Interpol. And I had a conversation with him one night in the pub, and he was talking about how difficult it is to sort of investigate crimes that are committed in all different countries. Like there is no easy way to kind of share that information between countries. And it kind of occurred to me that a business traveller, a bit like my husband at the time, who travelled like literally every week, could get away with murder. I mean, you could literally get away with murder. It would take a very long time for the authorities to catch up with you if you were committing murders in different countries. And so the idea for this one was born. And all the way through the book, the main character, Amanda, is kind of terrified of getting thrown out of Singapore, because obviously if you are sort of, accused of a crime or convicted of a crime or whatever, you can have your work permit revoked and you go home pretty quickly as a foreigner. And I mean, we didn't commit any crimes, but we did end up leaving Singapore quite quickly when my husband's job changed. So it was one of those slightly weird sort of, life mirroring art kind of scenarios. And so I sort of came back to this country and did the very, very final edits on the Singapore book right after we left, which was quite strange.
We've got a question that came in from Mike Hemming. He said, what books do you normally read yourself?
Hi, Mike. Thank you for your question. What books do I read myself? I actually read a lot of books in my genre, so a lot of psychological thrillers. I will kind of read pretty much anything, and I do sometimes actually try to break out of that genre, because I think sometimes you can end up in that sort of like little echo chamber thing, can't you? It's like a reading echo chamber, and as an author, obviously, you end up being sort of sent books, and there are books that I feel like I should read to sort of keep up to date, but I try and sort of push myself off in a different direction sometimes. So I'm just thinking what I've read recently. I read the latest Hilary Mantel right at the beginning of lockdown. I just read a crime book called Blood and Sugar, which was quite interesting because it was crime, but it was historical. It was set sort of in London, in Deptford, in the slave trade. So that was quite interesting. The odd sort of non-fiction, anything really. And it's one of the sort of the slight frustrations of I think of since I've become a writer, is that I don't read as kind of widely as I used to, because I moved 2 years ago back to this country. I got all of my collection of books back in the same place, and when I unpacked them, I sort of realised how widely I used to read, and the fact that I don't actually tend to do that quite so much anymore. So it's something I'd like to do, is get back to just reading, anything that takes my fancy, which is what I used to do, all across different genres.
We had a question from Helen Blenkensop from before we started that says, what's your favourite book out of all the stories that you've written?
Oh no. Oh, hi Helen. Thank you for your question. You see, that question, it's like asking me to choose between my children, isn't it? I suppose, I don't know. I don't know if it's, they all have a little place in my heart. I mean, The Trailing Spouse, like I said, turned out to be my little swan song to Singapore, which is a place that I love. I suppose this was my debut novel, and that's always special, isn't it? Anyone's debut novel. Yeah, I would probably, if I had to pick a favourite, I would probably still go with the debut, because it's just that was just such a powerful thing, to happen when you've been writing for years and you never knew if you were going to get published, and then boom, there it is. That's a good thing. And the anthology. I mean, I love the anthology for all the reasons I said before. So I love all my babies.
Should you follow that up with what's your favourite book that you wish you'd written?
Oh, that's tricky. I would probably say I'd love to write something that has like a huge sort of cultural impact, like Frankenstein. The sort of book that enters the sort of public consciousness, and I don't know, yeah. The Handmaid's Tale, I think, is quite, obviously, yeah, I'd love to have written that. Or something that sort of really shifts the genre, like Gone Girl, just kind of upped the bar in that sort of psychological thriller suspense genre. It was like everybody then had to write better to kind of, because that structurally that book was so interesting. Yeah. Or like Bridget Jones, a book that just like defined the era. Yeah. That would be pretty special. Yeah, I think one of those books that has like a massive cultural impact, just everyone, not even just that everyone has read it, but that it kind of defines something, that it kind of really speaks to people. It's like it just takes an issue and nails it. That's what I'd like to do.
I'm going to sneak in one of my questions now as well, because I read All the Little Children.
Oh yeah.
In preparation for our author chat, and it was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Would you plan on writing a follow-up to it, just to tie up the loose ends?
That is an often asked question. And funny enough, I realised today, I had a little revelation today on that note, which is that I can't write a sequel anymore, because I've thought about writing a sequel. So basically, All the Little Children is set in the aftermath of a pandemic, or the aftermath of a virus. And it's about a mum, well, two mums really, but it focuses on one mum and her children and how they survive in the aftermath of this virus. And it's really a coming of age story for the mum. It's her sort of process of accepting herself and accepting her own sort of flawed approach to motherhood. And she's not an easy woman. She's not a naturally maternal woman. Mothering doesn't come easily to her. She feels that her skills lie elsewhere, but suddenly she's thrown into this situation where she's alone with all of her kids and then suddenly a load of other kids as well. And she has to step up and she has to kind of prove herself. And that's why I sort of put the pandemic apocalyptic element in it, was because I just wanted to isolate her as much as I could and take away all the support structures that she normally relies on and leave her there on her own, face to face with her biggest fear, which is, am I or am I not a good mother? And that was the kind of the point of that book. And so when I got to the kind of the end of the book, the book kind of, it finishes her story. It resolves her story in terms of her, like I say, coming of age as a mother, but it certainly doesn't resolve all the issues to do with this pandemic, this kind of apocalypse that's kind of all kicking off in the background. Because obviously I couldn't have done that without writing another 500 words. And yeah, quite a few people have said, it didn't tie up all the loose ends, which is perfectly true. And you could write a sequel. And I've sort of thought about it, and I've talked to my agent about it, and I've talked to my publisher about it, and hummed and hawed. And now I've realised that because of the situation we are in with this COVID, where we actually have a real pandemic, this book came out in 2017, so it was like way back. I can't write it now. How could I write a pandemic story now? Because we've actually lived through one. I mean, it's fascinating actually to look back at some of the reviews for all the little children, and the number of people that said, I don't believe this, it could never happen. And now you think, well, I mean, okay, the virus in my book is more devastating than the one we're facing, but you realize, it's funny that there were some things in the book, like for example in my book, the island of Britain is quarantined, and that was based on real I read countries published pandemic response plans. That's where that came from, that idea of that the country would be quarantined. It came from like the real governmental pandemic response plans. I looked them up and read them, and then that is of course what has happened now. So there's a tiny weeny bit of satisfaction there, not very much, but but in terms of a sequel, I felt I couldn't go back now and write it, because we know what a pandemic is like. I can't really just make one up now. So it would be a totally different landscape,
Fair enough. We've got some lockdown questions actually. Okay. Samantha says, how have you coped with lockdown so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been okay, like everybody else. It's gone a bit mad. I think I've been very fortunate. I was saying earlier, with the anthology, I think I've actually been I'm really grateful that I had that going on in the background, that I had something, particularly in those early weeks, to sort of get stuck into and to be distracted by. And I had a lot of, I mean, it was only on WhatsApp, but it felt like social contact with all my fellow writers, as we were busy doing this thing. So I'm quite grateful for that. I think that really kind of got me through those first few weeks, and the sense that I was doing something, I mean, in a very small way, but I was doing something slightly useful. It was back in those days when we were all signing up to that NHS Responder app, and sort of had the sense that we were suddenly going to kind of like go into action and do something. And of course that didn't kind of quite happen. So I think a lot of people had that feeling of frustration that they want to help, but they don't know how to. And I sort of had this thing going on because we knew the money was going to go to charity. I felt like I was actually doing a little thing. So yeah, it's been okay. In terms of writing, it started off okay because I got into a routine of getting up earlier in the morning and writing for a couple of hours before the kids needed me. And then just in the last couple of weeks, that's dried up, because I think I've hit that stage in writing a novel where I need to kind of stop and think about what happens over the next 15,000 or so words. And I can't sort of hold it all in my head. I can't concentrate long enough. I'm okay. It's okay to sort of sit down and bang out like 1,000 words, because that's just like a little chunk. But to think about the whole sort of, the bigger picture of it, I'm just like, I can't concentrate. So I'm struggling a bit, but I'm sure I'll get it back, hopefully.
And Claire Empson asked, how are you managing the pressures of homeschooling and trying to write I think you've answered the trying to write bit a little bit, but
yeah. Well, I mean, again, I'm quite fortunate, really. My kids, their schools have given them a lot of work to do, so they've been sort of busy in the background. But yeah, I mean, as you know, Claire's put her finger right on it, really, which is, I think that is what's sort of distracting me from the writing, is that I never know when I'm going to be interrupted, and I find it really hard to kind of like slip into that sort of little, I don't know what it is, that kind of mental space where you can write, because I just never know when I'm going to be sort of pulled back out of it. It's a bit like trying to fall asleep. You know, like if you're trying to fall asleep and you know that something's going to happen, and it's like your body won't let you fall asleep. And I'm a bit like that with the writing. It's like I start writing and then my brain sort of keeps going like, maybe your kid's going to come downstairs, or maybe they're going to burst in, or maybe, you know, and I just find it hard to actually just let myself go into that little headspace.
Samantha asked, is there an event you're looking forward to attending once things begin again?
Oh, all the events. Yeah, I mean, it's gutting to think that Crime Fest should have been on this weekend. I'm gutted about Harrogate. I would normally go to Harrogate. That's obviously been cancelled. Have they cancelled Capital Crime yet? That's sort of towards the end of the year. I haven't heard that one's been.
That one's been announced yet. I know Harrogate got cancelled quite early.
Yeah, yeah. So fingers crossed for Capital Crime. I really, I love these events. I've really come to love them. I mean, for me, socially, it's a big deal, because, as you know, I'm sure everybody that you have on, Caroline, says the same thing, that you sit at home on your own writing quite a lot, and it's wonderful to sort of go out. It's very leveling and very reassuring to sort of sit and chat to people that are sort of doing the same. They have all the same sort of worries and challenges that I'm having. So to sort of actually go and be in the company of other authors is hugely important, I think, for me. And also to, and you meet readers and you meet bloggers and all of it. I was gutted to miss the London Book Fair as well, because although the London Book Fair is very sort of, it's not really aimed at authors, but it's kind of amazing just to be in that huge conference centre, and you can sort of go up and look out across all the different stands, all the different publishers, and that's where the sort of the business of books is happening. Because when you're at home, you can sometimes feel quite detached from it. I think that's why it was so nice actually to get this book through. They arrived last night, and to open it up and to hold an actual book. I think that's why it's so powerful for writers, because some of it you get detached almost from the idea that there is going to be a physical book at the end of it. It just becomes like words on a screen, or word counts, or deadlines, and digital. It's like just becomes like data, and you forget that there is actually like a physical thing that's going to come up at the end of it. So yeah, I miss all of that, and I'm looking forward to all of those. So fingers crossed for Capital Crime, which was good last year. So looking forward to it again.
I think we had one of the organisers of it on last week, so we'll have to check when that happened.
Yeah, it was late in the year last year. I can't just, my memory is.
Lincoln said it's scheduled for September.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Yeah, Capital. Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, but September maybe.
We might be able to be out then.
Right. Yeah.
So Janet Pywell asked, do you have a strict writing schedule?
Hi, Janet. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I do. It depends a little bit what stage of writing I'm at. If it's like first draft, then I will have like a word target each day. I only really seem to be able to manage to write in a sort of organized way when the kids are at school. So I'll just try and get the words out. Editing is a little bit different, but yeah, I'm quite disciplined, and I used to be a journalist. I was a journalist for a long time before I was writing fiction, and I am massively motivated by deadlines. So both of the first two books, actually, weirdly, I had decided I would finish in time for this completely arbitrary deadline, like just a deadline that I set myself. So the first one, All the Little Children, I wrote that one when I was in Switzerland, and I was coming back to this country for my graduation, because I did a creative writing blah blah thing, and I was coming back for the graduation, and I'd said, I'd love to finish the first draft before I come for the graduation. And I literally wrote the last chapter on the plane, flying back here for it. So, it was like down to the wire. And I did the same thing with The Trailing Spouse. I was coming back for something or other from Singapore, and I'd said I will finish it before I go back for that. And I wrote the last chapter on the plane on the way back from Singapore. So I will also pull my socks up if there's actually a deadline.
Even if it's one you make yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to play these like ridiculous tricks on myself just to, no, I do all of this stuff. I found this brilliant thing earlier this year, which was, it's a Spotify playlist, and it's called Sexy No No, Sexy No No. And it's not like sexy, it's nothing, it's not like salacious in any way whatsoever. It's a playlist that's put together of Brian Eno songs. So that's where the Sex Eno bit comes from, is the Brian Eno track. So like it'll have like a 15-minute, quite sort of trancey kind of Brian Eno track, which I find quite good to write to. And then you'll have a 3-minute Girls Aloud song. So that's where the Sexy No No bit comes from, is from the Girls Aloud. So I write for like 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden this like Girls Aloud will kick in, and I'll have 3 minutes where I'll kind of like move around, and, do something like get up and like just put the washing in the machine or something, or maybe do like some like 2 sit-ups or something. And then you go back into another Brian Eno song or track for 15 minutes. And I found that enormously motivating, that there's this thing that's kind of telling me what to do at certain times. And just tricks me into writing for 15 minutes and then moving for 3 minutes and then write for another 15 minutes. But I don't know why I need that. I don't know. It's like I'm still at school.
Sam asked you what inspired you to become a journalist and to write your first book.
Okay. What inspired me to be a journalist? I don't know. It sort of came out of nowhere. And what happened was I was at university, and I did an English degree. And on the same floor as my English degree was taught, there was also a media studies degree. And media studies degrees were still quite sort of newfangled then. This is back in the sort of early 90s. And I got into a bit of a sort of a panic that I'd taken the wrong course, and that all the people that were doing the media studies course were going to be like way ahead of me in like the kind of the queue for jobs. And every day I used to walk past their notice board for the media studies course, and there was this big sign on it saying like BBC Radio Stoke, which was my local radio station. We have this youth programme on Sunday, we take volunteers. And I thought to myself, maybe I'll volunteer, because I'm not doing that. I've done the wrong course, but maybe if I volunteer to work at the local BBC station, I might sort of, make up for it somehow, So I kind of phoned them up, and I ended up going along. And from that, I ended up sort of, my first job in radio was presenting a 3-hour programme on a Sunday afternoon, which is ridiculous, really, when you think about it. Like, who thought it was a good idea to let somebody on air with absolutely zero experience or indeed talent? And so, that was kind of the first thing I did. And I tell you, not a single other person on that media studies course, not one of them volunteered to go and work at the local BBC radio station. It was just me and this guy who I'm still really good friends with, who was also not doing that course. And we both ended up having, getting full-time jobs at the BBC out of it. And, BBC Radio Stoke was amazing. It was a brilliant place to kind of, to sort of learn my trade, as it were. And so I think, if I hadn't seen that flyer on their notice board, that none of that ever would have happened. And then the move into writing fiction was probably actually it was just something I'd always wanted to do. And I put it off and put it off and put it off for years. And then when I had young children, and I was so sort of frustrated with not being able to get back to work, that I thought, I might as well just give this thing a shot. And I kind of gave myself 2 years to do a master's and see what happened. And luckily, the book that I wrote for the master's was turned into All the Little Children. I just got really lucky. I mean, it wasn't actually the first book I'd written. I'd written books before, novels that had kind of gone into a bottom drawer, but that was the first one I wrote, like, seriously,
Victoria asks, she says, talking about radio
Mm.
and Radio Stoke,
Yeah.
any audio plans for Afraid of the Light?
Yes, there are. Is that a question from Victoria Selman?
Cameron, yeah, it is, yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to work out whether she's trying to prompt me to, because there's something going on in the background, and now I don't know if I'm allowed to say it or not. We, yes, we do have plans to do an audio version of Afraid of the Light, and we have had an agreement of a quite a well-known actor who was really kindly offered to record the whole thing for us, for nothing, because he's lovely, and he's a sort of he's a household name. I mean, it'd be amazing. I'm just looking that Victoria's saying, wondering if you want to reveal our scoop. Can I reveal the scoop? Can you say yes? I don't want to like blart it out and then I'm not supposed to. But we've been sort of sitting on it for a couple of weeks because obviously with the COVID situation, we just can't, we haven't been able to record it. He's not been able to sort of go into a studio and we've not been able to go to him to record it. But as soon as we do that, it will be out there. Oh yeah. Okay. So I can do. Oh, this is exciting. It's like breaking news. It's like being back in the radio and the BBC. So it is John Sessions. John Sessions very kindly agreed to to record the book, which is kind of which is amazing. And yeah, really, really sweet. And I think he'll do an amazing job of it because he's recorded so many books. He does a lot of audio books. I mean, obviously, as well as being a stage actor and a film actor, and just like I say, a comedian, and one of those people that everyone kind of knows his voice. He is, yeah, exactly as Victoria says, he's a superstar. So it's amazing. And it was one of these little things where on the WhatsApp, when it came through a sort of a personal connection, when he agreed to do it, we were all just like, oh my God, that's like really serious. So as soon as we can get John Sessions into a studio, or we can get somebody who is allowed to go to him to record it, then he will do that. And we will have the superstar audio version of Afraid of the Light, which is going to be...
We've got a question from David Gilchrist, who's my dad. Hi, Dad.
Oh, hi. I didn't realise that. Hello, David.
He says, what's the picture behind you?
Oh, the picture is... Hang on, I'm just going to slide out of the way so you can see the picture. It's my scary rabbits. Tell me what you think of the rabbits, because I kind of judge people on whether or not they like my rabbits. It's a massive picture. We bought that when we were in Singapore. It's actually an Australian picture. And I really liked it because, so this rabbit here reminds me very much of my nan for some reason, because she was the youngest of 4 sisters, and she was sort of the young silly one, really. And somehow I think that one there is like the young silly rabbit, because she's got like her kind of sort of little party dress on, and like this one is probably my Auntie Charlotte, because she was like quite the serious one, and that's the sort of the dowdy one. And it kind of reminded me, it just as soon as I saw it, it kind of reminded me of my nan and her 3 older sisters, and it made me think that they're in these sort of like old lady clothes, but they're all like young bunnies. And I thought, as I sort of get older, I thought there was something really nice there, that in their heads they're still these like, when they get together and they go all sort of giggly, they feel like young bunnies again, even though they're sort of middle-aged ladies. So I really like that. But then after we bought it, I read about the artist, and it turns out that, because he's Australian, it turns out that it's about immigration and it's to do with rabbits and myxomatosis. So we were like, oh, okay. Anyway, but
You said it's very cool.
I still really like it. It makes me feel happy. My children are scared of it, which is obviously fantastic. And like I say, if people like my rabbits, then I like them. That's how it goes.
You like my dad, then. He says it's cool.
That's good. You're in. You can come around for a cup of tea if you like my rabbits.
And Victoria said that Jonna is friends with Stephen Fry too, which is so exciting. So maybe
Yeah,
you could read the Christmas fairy lights.
he can read Afraid of the Fairy Light, or maybe he could. Maybe we could get Stephen Fry to read Alex North's Forward.
Yeah, that'd be good.
He'll do that for us. I don't know. I don't know. It's so exciting to have John Sessions. We just can't, it's just been so frustrating to have to like sit on this thing because we've all been sort of scrabbling around to try and see if we can find a studio that he can go to, and the different between the 14 of us, the authors, we've got it turned out that we've got so many sort of contacts and we've sort of been really kind of pooling our resources. It's been quite cool. It's been really quite good. But yeah, we haven't managed to sort that out yet. But I think now that obviously the lockdown is easing a bit, I think it will be soon.
Jennifer Price has come up. She said, as she's not read your books yet, what genre are you?
Okay. So, well, I'm a bit of a butterfly. I'm a bit of a genre butterfly. I've got to be honest. I really need to sort of settle down and work out what it is I want to write and sit with it. So All the Little Children, I don't know, that is a psychological suspense survival thriller. How would you describe it, Caroline? You read it.
Dystopian fiction?
Dystopian. It's a bit apocalyptic. It's got suspense written on the back. So it's a suspense. There you go, I've been told. And then this one, The Trailing Spouse, is probably more of a straightforward psychological suspense, domestic noir, domestic thriller, that sort of thing. The new one, The Last to Know, yeah, again, definitely psychological suspense. Although in this book, I've got two narrators, and the second narrator is a police officer. And so I think this is probably also my most crimey book. I think this one probably counts as actual crime on account of having a police officer. And it's about an American journalist who moves back to her husband's village in the UK. They've been living abroad together. She's never been to his village before. And when they get there, they've got a young son as well. She discovers that the husband and his whole family are absolutely hated by the local community. And so her first sort of task is to work out kind of why that is. And then some human remains are found sort of on the sort of family estate. And that kind of brings this old case back to light. And it sort of explains why the family was so hated. And my police officer character obviously is involved in that investigation. So the two sort of kind of come together. So that one is definitely crime, and and Afraid of the Light it's all crime. And so my story for this one was a crime story as well. So but like I say, I'm a bit butterfly in my attention, and I suppose psychological thriller sort of is the umbrella that goes across all of those, that connects them all together. And I like writing about, I suppose the other thing that connects them together is that I like writing about women who are very conflicted. They're sort of, they're feminists. They would describe themselves as feminists, but they're quite sort of conflicted by all the sort of, the contradictions, and life sort of gets in the way and messes everything up. And they're not really doing life as well as they would like to. I think you could say that would probably describe all of my characters.
We've got some updates from Victoria again. She says it looks like it might get recorded in the next week or so.
Oh, right. Awesome. Okay.
She also says she loved your dystopian short. So creepy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a bit of a weird one. That was very dystopian as well, wasn't it? And so I like a bit of dystopia. I read quite a lot of dystopia. And actually, I mentioned doing my degree earlier, my English degree, the one where I felt like I should have been doing media studies, and I'm actually now pleased that I didn't. And my final dissertation for that was on I wrote about women in the Terminator and Alien sci-fi movies. So you might have noticed a little bit of Sarah Connor creeping into All the Little Children, really, if you're a Terminator fan. I think that came through from those. So after 20 years of being stored in the back of my head, that kind of came out in the book.
We had a really lovely question from Pauline Render Byron as well, one of our members.
Okay,
She
hi
said,
Pauline.
I'm just going to scroll back up and find it. She said, do you have a favourite book that you love so much you've read it many times? A bit like a bookish comfort blanket.
That is a good question, isn't it? Yeah. I do. I've read. I have read The Handmaid's Tale several times, many times, in fact. And I think I've sort of read it in different ways. I think, you know, I read it sort of back in the day as a young woman. You know, I sort of read it with the sort of slightly aghast and sort of in during that period of a sort of, you know, a kind of, I don't know, sort of, it sounds a bit melodramatic, a bit grand, but like that sort of feminist awakening sort of thing, you know. And then as a writer, I've read it a couple of times, just looking at the structure of it and trying to work out how she does what she does, and just, you know, enjoying the language and the, you know, how beautifully she constructs sentences and chapters and all of this. So yeah, that's a book I've gone back to many times. Probably in answer to Pauline's question, actually, it would mainly be children's books that come to mind. It's been one of the many nice things about having kids is being able to sort of, you know, go back over those books with the children. So books like Charlotte's Web, still every single time the last chapter makes me cry. And even to the point where it like disturbs the children because they're not crying, but I'm just crying. And they're like, what's wrong with mummy? And there's a book called The Rats of Nim, which is amazing. And it's about animal rights, really. And I feel like that sort of turned me into I've been vegetarian for a long time. And I'm fairly sure that books like that sort of quite seriously influenced all of that kind of stuff. Winnie the Pooh. I still sort of sometimes will kind of just dip in and read a little bit, and it's incredibly sophisticated. The language is really, really sophisticated. The comedy is very sophisticated. So yeah, that would be that.
We've got about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to sneak a couple of last questions in. There was another one from Pauline. She said, is there any particular authors you'd like to have over for a coffee and a chat?
Loads. I would have to have like a whole house party. Okay, I mentioned Frankenstein earlier. I would love to have Mary Shelley over because, apart from the fact that I you know, Frankenstein is definitely one of my favourite novels, and I sort of admire that, but I would love to know more about like the story of the story. You know, this wonderful sort of myth of her being at this big house, the Villa Diodati, is it, in Switzerland. I lived in Switzerland for a while, so I feel like we'd have something in common. And I would love to know more about sort of, you know, that night when this story is supposed to have been dreamt up, you know, whether that really happened and how, you know, what was the sort of the development of it. And I'd also be really curious to know, because there she was in this house, Mary Shelley, with like her husband, Percy Shelley, who was you know, like a romantic poet, and also Lord Byron, who is this obviously this huge sort of macho. I mean, how much testosterone was there in that house with Lord Byron in there? Like, he's always just seemed as a bit of a macho, bit of an idiot, a bit of a knobhead, really. I kind of think he probably was, you know what I mean? Because he was very, you know, he was just so sort of macho. And I would be really curious to know how this sort of woman, how she kind of managed to sort of claw herself out from being in like the shadow of these two men, these two quite dominant men. And in the end, her story is the one that has really sort of resonated through history much more than what they wrote. I mean, Lord Byron, it's more his reputation that's resonated much more than his actual works. And, you know, and I'd love to sort of like see how smug she feels really about that. And then the other person I'd probably invite to my parties would be a load of local authors, because I quite recently moved to sort of Brighton area, and there are loads of great authors around here, and it would be wonderful to have like this little salon.
There is a lot of really good writers in Brighton.
Yeah.
One last question from Will. He says, did you go abroad in the first place for your husband's work, or did you always plan to travel?
I always planned to travel. Well, and I did travel. And it was what was great. I mean, it was for his job. I mean, that was the sort of that gave us the kind of the structure of moving abroad, and it was wonderful to be able to go and live abroad rather than just visiting places, because you develop, you have a completely different relationship with a place when you live there than when you sort of pass through. So it was that, that was quite different. I like I said before, I was a journalist, so I always knew that I would be able to work wherever we were, and it opened quite a lot of doors for me as a journalist. I did some work. I made sort of documentaries. I worked for Radio 4 and programs like Woman's Hour, which, when I was in this country and I was just an average news reporter, I never got anywhere near Woman's Hour. Like, that's quite elite. And then I disappear off to West Africa, and suddenly, I was making programs for them or making pieces for them. So it kind of opened up a lot of doors for me, just because I was suddenly in this unique place and I could give them something, give them something different. So that was amazing. And it was brilliant for me to be in those countries as a journalist, because it meant that I got to sort of go to places and speak to people that otherwise, as an outsider, you wouldn't have seen. But because I could sort of turn up with my little BBC card, I got to kind of go into places. And I interviewed the Prime Minister of Cameroon and things like that, like these crazy things. And so you got this kind of brilliant insight that otherwise, you don't get when you just sort of pass through. So it was brilliant, loved it.
Do you want to finish off with a reminder about all your amazing books?
Well, I will focus on this book because my new book isn't coming out until August, so I will probably bang on about that in about 2 months' time. So I will remind you of this amazing book, which is Afraid of the Light, which is the anthology of crime fiction, 14 authors, 14 stories, plus a really quite moving forward from Alex North, Steve, who I know is on this group as well. And it's available as a Kindle book for $1.99 on Amazon, or the paperback $3.99, or, as we now know, very soon, an audiobook read by John Sessions. And I don't know how much that will be. But all the proceeds from all of this will going to the Samaritans, which is a very, very worthy organisation at the current time of crisis.
It is, and we'll put some more links back to that into the group, just so that everyone can go and find it, because it sounds like a really good cause.
It is a really good cause. It's really important. They do such important work. And judging by the reviews, I do think it's also a good book. For 14 authors, we're very varied. We're very diverse voices. So if there's people there that you know and love, then there's an extra story from them. And if there's people there that you've never met before in print, then you can discover them.
That's a great way to find a new author, actually.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we'll make sure we put that link in. And thank you so much for coming and joining us and answering all of our questions.
Thank you, Caroline. It's been lovely to speak to you. And thank you for all the questions. Oh, and I did say that I would do a competition because I got my books last night. So I will give one of these away to my favourite questioner, and I'll post that in the comments after this. I'll work it out afterwards.
No worries. Go and have a stroll through all the comments and see
if
there are some questions we missed as well that you might.
Well, I'll write a little answer to them then in the comments.
No worries. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your questions.